The town stretched like a living canvas, where ancient clay streets met the shimmer of modern glass towers. Children ran between market stalls, their laughter weaving through the calls of traders hawking yams, spices, and brightly dyed fabrics. The scent of roasted maize mingled with the faint smoke from charcoal fires, and elders sat under the shade of old mango trees, nodding knowingly at passers-by. Above, the sun strained through thin clouds, casting uneven shadows across the dusty streets. Between the cracked walls of humble homes and the polished marble of new buildings, the people of the town moved with careful eyes, aware of who they were, who they might become, and the unspoken rules that held their lives together. Even as the town breathed, the sky began to change. Heavy clouds rolled from the horizon like the slow march of destiny. Birds scattered in uneasy flocks, and villagers paused, eyes turned upward, whispering of omens. "The ancestors are restless," a woman muttered as she tied her baby to her back. "The sky weeps for what is to come." The wind carried the scent of wet earth before the first drops fell. Over the modest compound on the outskirts, the clouds mirrored the storm brewing inside. A husband's pride and a wife's quiet dignity were on a collision course, and nature itself seemed to hold its breath. The family home sat humble and firm, its clay walls cracked by years of sun and storm. The roof, patched with palm fronds and corrugated sheets, sagged under the weight of seasons. Inside, the floor was dried clay, rough against bare feet, and in the corners, carvings of ancestral symbols glimmered faintly in the fading light. Elders gathered silently on worn stools, their eyes sharp and steady, weighing every movement of the younger generation. They spoke little, yet the air was thick with expectation. Respect, obedience, and honor were demanded, even without words. The household's modest means were clear, but within those walls lay a fierce hope, a desire to maintain dignity in a world that measured value in wealth and display. The husband moved through the compound with purpose, his hands calloused from years of labor, yet his back always straight with pride. He was a man of stubborn resolve, proud of his lineage, yet haunted by the constant reminder that wealth had eluded his family. Authority, he believed, belonged only to him. The home answered to his voice and his decisions. Yet lately, he felt an unease he could not name. His wife's quiet confidence, her patience in the face of hardship, stirred a jealous flicker in his chest. There were moments when her silence seemed like a challenge, and he bristled at forces he could not see, forces that threatened the fragile balance of his pride. She moved gently, her presence a quiet ripple in the household. He saw her as soft, yet there was strength hidden in her calm eyes and steady hands. She carried herself with dignity, even as her pregnancy rounded her form with gentle curves of life and hope. Beneath her modest dress, the truth of her lineage was hidden, a wealth that could rival kingdoms, a power she had chosen to keep secret. Yet it was not wealth alone that defined her. Patience, loyalty, and unshakable courage radiated from her. Every act of grace, every silent glance, held the quiet weight of someone who knew her worth without needing the world to acknowledge it. Across town, whispers traveled faster than the wind. "Do you know whose daughter she is?" a trader asked another, as they watched the woman pass through the market. "They say she comes from wealth, a house no one dares enter." Rumors carried fragments of truth. A man of immense influence, a leader who combined fortune with tradition, kept watch over his daughter from afar. He did not intervene hastily. He did not shout or threaten. His calm was deliberate, a quiet power that demanded respect. In the days to come, his presence, though unseen, would shape fate, guiding justice in ways no human pride could anticipate. The villagers watched from their doorways and under the shade of ancient baobab trees, eyes sharp, whispers low but deliberate. Market women paused mid-haggle, turning their heads as the couple passed, their baskets heavy with yams, peppers, and kola nuts. "See how she walks," one murmured to another. "So quiet, so calm, for a poor man's wife." Elders leaned on their carved walking sticks, their faces unreadable, yet their gaze weighed heavier than any voice. The compound, the home of labor and pride, had become a stage. Every glance, every gesture of the husband or his wife was measured against the unspoken laws of the village. The neighbors were not merely spectators. They were the heartbeat of judgment, carrying ancestral eyes in their watchful scrutiny. Inside the home, tension simmered like a kettle over an open flame. The husband's jaw clenched as he watched her move gracefully through the small, sunlit room. Every gentle sigh, every patient smile she offered to the children or the elders, seemed a quiet accusation of his own pride. "Why does she not worry, not plead?" he muttered under his breath, pacing the room. "Does she not see our struggles?" Gossip outside only sharpened the edge of his unease. "Too calm, too poised, for a poor man's wife," the villager's words echoed in his mind, settling like stones in his chest. The pregnancy pressed against his sense of authority, making every unspoken tension heavier. He felt the need to assert control, to remind the world, and himself, that he was master of his house. That night, the sky opened its heart, and the storm rumbled across the town like a warning drum. Rain pounded on the tin roof, ran in rivulets along the cracked clay walls, and turned the courtyard into a muddy mirror. Inside, the husband's pride boiled over. He grabbed her luggage without a word, his fingers tight around the handles, and hurled it into the torrential rain. The contents soaked and scattered, carried away by water and wind. The act was more than anger, it was a rejection of her, the child she carried, and the future she represented. Outside, the villagers whispered that the ancestors were watching, that the storm itself had become witness to his cruelty. She stood for a moment, silent, watching the rain claim what he had thrown, before lifting her head and stepping barefoot into the soaked earth. Water seeped into the folds of her dress, her hair plastered to her shoulders, yet she walked with a dignity that defied the storm. Each step left a print in the wet soil, a quiet declaration that she would endure, that injustice and pride were visible to the eyes of the ancestors. Those watching from the village sensed the weight of the moment. Justice, reconciliation, or revenge hung suspended, waiting for the story to unfold. At first light, she set out along the dusty road beyond the town, her journey slow, measured, and heavy with grief. Her belly rounded with life, and each step pressed her sorrow into the earth. Villagers paused in the fields and at market stalls, catching sight of the lone figure trudging beneath the rising sun, her head held high, her silence louder than any words. "Who is she?" someone whispered, eyes wide with awe. "No one walks like that without purpose, without destiny." Her path carried her past familiar hills and unfamiliar villages, every glance she drew carrying the weight of ancestral watching. Each footfall became a testament to moral endurance, a signal that resilience, patience, and virtue often walked quietly, unseen, but with power beyond measure. She never spoke of her origins, never lifted the veil of her true identity. The pride of her family, the fortune she was born to, remained hidden, not from shame, but as a test of character and patience. To reveal herself now would be to taint the strength she carried in silence. And yet, that silence did more than conceal. It became a shield, a force that shaped the husband's ignorance, leaving him blind to the truth and fueling the irony of his own pride. In every village she passed, whispers followed, not of wealth, but of a woman who walked with quiet courage, whose suffering was both her armor and her legacy. The road outside the town led her to a small village tucked between golden hills and dense forests. Each step weighed heavy with exhaustion, her pregnancy making the journey slower, yet her spirit did not waver. A group of women noticed her as she struggled along the muddy path. "Mama, come rest," called an elderly midwife, her voice soft but commanding respect. They guided her into a humble home, offering clean mats, warm water, and bowls of steaming herbs. Their hands moved with practiced care, unwrapping leaves, pounding roots, and chanting quiet prayers to the ancestors for protection and strength. "You have walked far," one midwife said, brushing rain from her hair. "The spirits watch over those who suffer with patience." They fed her broth rich with nourishment and gave her a place to lay, their presence a shield against the loneliness of the world. Even strangers brought water and blankets, their gestures small but resonant of communal solidarity. In this place, suffering was never solitary. It belonged to the village, to the mothers, and to the wisdom of generations. As she rested, her mind wandered to a life she had almost forgotten. Palaces with grand marble halls, rooms lined with gold and velvet, yet in the midst of such luxury, her father had taught her humility. "Power without respect is no power at all," he would say, his voice echoing in memory as vividly as the beating of ceremonial drums. Boardrooms and banquets had been her classrooms, yet her lessons were not of wealth, but of balance, between generosity and restraint, pride and compassion. Those lessons guided her choices now, shaping her patience, her dignity, and her understanding of human frailty. She had married not for fortune, but for love. Her wealth remained hidden, a secret woven into her very being, meant to test the heart of the man she had chosen. Every act of kindness she had offered, every silent patience she had endured, was a measure of loyalty and character. Wealth alone could not bind hearts, only love and virtue could withstand life's trials. And now, as she lay among the fragrant herbs and whispered prayers, her restraint glimmered quietly against the husband's pride, a tension invisible yet heavy in the balance of fate. Far from her resting place, the husband had expected relief after driving her away, but the world did not bend to his will. Business deals fell through, trust eroded, and the whispers of the village gnawed at his reputation. "They speak too loudly," he muttered, though each failure and each judgment from the elders weighed heavier than any hunger he had ever known. Nights brought dreams of water rising over his compound, of voices calling his name in tones he could not ignore. The ancestors, it seemed, had not forgotten his actions, and his pride grew like an anchor pulling him beneath the weight of consequences he had not foreseen. In public, he laughed loudly, trying to mask the gnawing fear with mockery. "She has gone, and I am still master of my house," he boasted to merchants and neighbors. Yet in the quiet corners of the compound, anxiety whispered, and his sleep trembled with warnings of judgment. The elders watched, the community murmured, and the spirits lingered in the spaces between words. Pride, as the villagers knew, would not escape its reckoning. Finally, the elders spoke with the weight of centuries in their voices. "To cast away a pregnant woman," the oldest said, leaning on his carved staff, "is a taboo that stains the house and the heart. The ancestors will not ignore this. You must seek balance, and you must seek forgiveness, for the earth watches, and so do we." Their words fell like stones, echoing in the husband's chest. For the first time, he felt the gravity of social and spiritual accountability pressing upon him. In the silence that followed, he realized that no wealth, no mocking laughter, could shield him from the judgment of his people, or the ancestors. The rain returned, not gentle this time, but relentless, hammering the earth as if the sky itself could not forget the wrongs done. Water ran in black rivulets down the cracked walls of the compound, pooling around the threshold, mirroring the turmoil inside the man who had once thrown love and life into the storm. Each drop seemed a voice, whispering of ancestral eyes that watched, weighing pride against virtue. "The spirits remember," a villager murmured to another, pointing to the gray sky. "Even the wind cannot carry away what has been done." The husband paced the hall, fists clenched, yet the storm outside mirrored the chaos he could not escape, proof that human arrogance, once set loose, bends only to moral consequence. Far from the pounding rain, whispers spread like wildfire. "A family of great wealth," one trader whispered, lowering his voice as if the ancestors themselves might hear, "searches for a daughter lost to the storms of fate." Villagers paused in the market, children clutched to their mothers' backs, ears straining. "Some say her mother was of noble blood. Some say she carries a legacy no man can touch," another added, eyes wide with wonder. The gossip thickened like the smoke of cooking fires, stitching tension into every village and road. The unseen search seemed larger than life, as if destiny itself had sent its envoys to trace the missing heir, leaving the husband unaware that fate was now in motion. Miles away, the father moved silently. He did not raise banners or sound trumpets, yet every village he passed sensed his presence. With quiet patience, he questioned elders, traced faint tracks, and listened for whispers carried on the wind. His wealth, vast as the plains, was unused in force. Instead, he relied on truth, observation, and moral guidance. "Justice walks softly, but it never sleeps," he said to a midwife who had once aided his daughter, her eyes wide with respect. Even without lifting a hand, he shaped outcomes, his presence a shadow over the man whose pride had set destruction loose. His movement across the towns was like the drumbeat of a patient ancestor, steady, deliberate, inevitable. The husband, meanwhile, floundered in chaos. Deals faltered, respect eroded, and nightly dreams reminded him that nothing, neither wealth nor bravado, could halt the tide of consequences. Across towns, the father's silent gaze ensured that morality and destiny aligned, waiting for the moment when all threads would converge. Every choice the husband made, every boast uttered, was seen and measured. In African wisdom, power without guidance is blind, wealth without moral restraint is hollow. The quiet patience of the father was proof. Justice, though slow, cannot be denied. In a distant compound, the wife gave birth. The room was filled with women whose hands bore generations of wisdom, midwives, healers, and family loyalists. The child's first cry cut through the air like a drum announcing a new era. She held her newborn to her chest, her calm eyes reflecting the storm of past trials. This was no ordinary child. In the traditions of her people, he carried the promise of ancestral hope, a living bridge between the wisdom of the elders and the justice of the gods. Outside, the world might have remained unaware, but within these walls, fate was quietly being written. Her calm strength, unbroken by loss or hardship, cast a shadow over the ignorance of the man who had scorned her. Days later, the husband received a letter delivered by a polished messenger. "A position awaits you at the Yaboa compound," it read, inviting him to what seemed an ordinary opportunity. Pride stirred within him, and he laughed aloud. "Finally, a chance to prove my worth," he said to no one in particular, unaware that each word carried him closer to the web of fate. The compound, with its towering glass and polished halls, was not just a workplace. It was a stage where tradition and modernity met, and where judgment, moral reckoning, and ancestral wisdom would unfold. Every step he would take from that day forward would be guided by consequences he had ignored, and by the presence of a family whose power, though veiled, could no longer be hidden. He stepped into the gleaming hall, expecting opportunity, unaware that fate had set a mirror before him. His eyes fell upon a figure seated at the head of the boardroom table, calm, poised, and commanding. She was the woman he had cast into the rain, her posture serene yet full of unspoken authority. The air seemed to shift, the chatter of assistants and clerks fading as her gaze met his. "It is you," he whispered, disbelief coating each syllable. The room itself seemed to acknowledge the truth. Virtue, patience, and resilience had lifted her far above his arrogance. The power she wielded now was quiet, earned, and undeniable. His chest tightened as he realized the weight of the moment. The one he had rejected now stood as living proof that character surpasses pride. A hush fell as the door opened again, and a tall, commanding figure entered. He was calm, his steps deliberate, his presence heavy with authority. The whispers in the hall seemed to bend toward him. "This is my daughter," he said simply, his voice carrying the weight of wealth, wisdom, and ancestral judgment. The husband's knees weakened. This was no ordinary man. This was a force tempered by morality, one whose patience had guided justice without a raised hand. Every eye in the room, every subtle glance, reminded him that wealth without wisdom is powerless against virtue. The father's silence alone was more formidable than any shouted threat. From the corner of the hall came a low, steady beat of drums. Slowly at first, then louder, each strike echoed like the heartbeat of the ancestors. "Hear the rhythm," one of the assistants murmured. "It speaks of truth, judgment, and consequences." The husband's hands clenched, his eyes darting to the walls where carvings of ancestral symbols reminded him that no action is unseen. Each drumbeat pulled at the threads of his pride, making his earlier arrogance feel heavier, more fragile. The room itself became a vessel of moral reckoning, the drums tying the present to generations of tradition and the inexorable laws of right and wrong. The elders seated along the sides watched without a word. Their eyes were steady, scrutinizing, and deep with judgment. One elder tilted his head, letting silence speak. Another, fingers drumming lightly on a carved staff, seemed to measure the weight of the husband's folly. Every wrinkle, every gaze, carried the history of justice and community accountability. The husband felt their scrutiny like a living force, pressing against the walls of his ego, showing him that cruelty and pride do not escape notice. Here, in their calm observation, the moral spine of his actions was laid bare. Outside, the storm had paused. Rain ceased as abruptly as it had begun, leaving the courtyard slick and shining under the dim sun. A hush of relief swept through the room, as if nature itself recognized the turning of fate. The husband's heart mirrored the sudden quiet. His chest, once full of arrogance and defiance, now felt emptier than ever. The pause of the rain was no mere weather. It was acknowledgment, validation, and warning, a silent testament that the truth had arrived and that the world, seen and unseen, had noticed. He swallowed hard, the reality settling like a stone in his stomach. He had rejected not just a wife, but a blessing, a lineage, a future that carried more weight than all the gold he might ever earn. "All this," he murmured to himself, voice breaking, "and I could not see." Pride, ego, and fear had blinded him to loyalty, love, and virtue. His hands trembled as he realized the magnitude of loss, the child, the woman he had loved, and the legacy that was now beyond his grasp. Tears formed, unbidden, as regret and shame overwhelmed him. He had learned too late that arrogance carries a cost, and that some truths, once revealed, cannot be reversed. She sat, composed and still, the room heavy with her quiet dignity. Not a word escaped her lips, yet the weight of her presence spoke louder than any accusation could. Every eye in the hall seemed drawn to her calm, the strength of her silence pressing against the husband's chest. He shifted uneasily, heart hammering. The absence of reproach was a verdict in itself. "She doesn't need to speak," whispered one of the elders. "Her silence is the measure of justice." Each moment of quiet drove home the truth. She had endured, she had remained steadfast, and now, in restraint, she commanded the power that he had rejected. Pride faltered before virtue, and the man finally began to feel the true cost of his folly. The father's gaze swept the room, calm, unwavering. Not a shout, not a scold, not a threat left his lips, yet the weight of his presence was suffocating. The husband could feel it in his bones, the power of restraint, the authority of morality, the inevitability of judgment. "Do you see now what pride has wrought?" the father's eyes seemed to ask, silent but piercing. Every movement, every beat of his heart, echoed the truth. Wealth alone does not make one powerful, wisdom and justice do. The room trembled under the force of unspoken command, and the husband realized that calm terror was mightier than any raised voice or harsh punishment. He fell to his knees before the elders and the assembly, finally stripped of pretense and arrogance. I was blind," he stammered, voice shaking. "I let pride rule where love and loyalty should have guided me. Wealth, influence, and eloquence were powerless here. Only humility mattered." He bowed his head as the elders observed, a living lesson in the breaking of ego. The murmurs of the community carried the moral: a man must face his wrongs openly, or destiny will enforce them. This confrontation, simple yet profound, became the crucible in which he would forge understanding, repentance, and eventual redemption. Forgiveness did not come immediately. Whispers circulated through the compound and beyond, carrying the weight of collective judgment. The husband stood under the eyes of his community, aware that he had no claim to mercy without effort. "He must earn it," one elder said softly, and the words clung to him like the humid air of the rainy season. Social and spiritual scrutiny pressed upon him, reinforcing that prideful actions do not vanish into oblivion. The first steps of redemption began here, not with entitlement, but with recognition that humility is learned, not demanded. He then approached the gathering, voice steady despite the shame. "I ask for forgiveness from those I have wronged, from the ancestors I have dishonored, and from the woman I have failed," he declared. He performed rituals of atonement, pouring libations and offering symbolic gifts, gestures that bound him to tradition and morality. 4 days he labored, repairing homes, fetching water, and assisting the elderly, each act a lesson in humility, each bead of sweat a penance for his ego. Through these deeds, he began to understand the depth of loyalty and the value of action over empty words. Returning to his ancestral lands, he bent to the earth, working alongside villagers he had once seen as beneath him. Hands in the soil, back bent with labor, he began to shed the armor of arrogance he had worn for so long. The sweat on his brow became a baptism of understanding, the weight of each tool a reminder that strength comes not from wealth, but from service, respect, and connection. Through toil, he began to grasp what he had lost and what it truly means to honor love, tradition, and community. She watched him from across the hall, calm, her hands resting lightly on her child's small head. The storm of pride and rage had passed, leaving only quiet judgment. "I forgive you," she said softly, her voice steady, carrying both mercy and unshakable dignity. Yet her eyes held the memory of betrayal, a silent reminder that forgiveness did not erase what had been done. The husband bowed his head, tears breaking where arrogance once stood. Her choice was not weakness, it was strength sculpted from patience, wisdom, and love. She had learned that true power lies not in revenge, but in the ability to rise above, to command respect without striking, to temper justice with compassion. The child stirred in her arms, eyes wide, innocent yet knowing. In them, the weight of legacy rested. "This child," she whispered to herself, "will carry our lessons forward. Not merely an heir of wealth, but of wisdom, honor, and resilience." Between modern ambition and ancestral tradition, the child was a living bridge, a reminder that family, love, and moral integrity endure beyond pride and folly. The tiny hands seemed to reach out toward both worlds, linking the lessons of the past to the promise of the future. Outside, rain fell once more, gentle now, washing the earth with a rhythm of reflection. Each drop seemed to carve the story of pride and consequence into the soil. "Pride destroys before hunger does," she murmured, recalling the old saying her father had taught her. Love, tested by hardship, revealed character. The rain reminded all who watched that suffering is a teacher, not a curse. It cleansed not to punish, but to allow growth, to wash away ego and nourish understanding. The earth drank deeply, and so too did the hearts of those who had witnessed the drama of human failing and redemption. Finally, he knelt in the rain, the same rain he had once used to humiliate, now embracing him in quiet absolution. The droplets soaked through his clothes, through his shame, into his heart. Around him, the ancestors' presence was palpable, silent witnesses to humility now earned. Their judgment was no longer a threat. It had been appeased by his repentance and labor. Justice had been restored, not through wealth, not through punishment, but through truth, courage, and moral alignment. He rose slowly, transformed, carrying in his chest the weight of lessons learned and the promise of a future tempered by humility. The family stood together, a living testament to virtue triumphing over pride, and to the enduring power of patience, mercy, and ancestral wisdom.